Hello, ToleTown. It's Lorrie here. I'm super excited to be painting this project with you. January Bright Beginnings project. Um, we are going to be painting an art journal, and not just painting an art journal, we're going to be creating an art journal. So this is actually a workshop that I have for you. We will be creating the cover with all these cute and pretty embellishments. I'm going to try to turn it this way so you can see this is three-dimensional. The flowers, the leaves, the buttons, the bunting, all added on to the cover. The cover is cut canvas. And then as the second part of the workshop, we're going to be actually creating the journal itself. And this is so much fun. It's such a wonderful journal design because as you can see as I'm flipping through here, all of the pages lie flat. It's magical. So as you work in your journal, whether you're writing or creating art in it, all of your pages are beautifully flat for you to work on. You can see that I have filled my journal with vintage papers, with coffee dyed papers, with stained papers, but you can fill yours with regular white paper, with lined paper. If you want to have a mix like I have here, you could use book papers. You could use magazine pages. You could use an old calendar. Any paper that you have around you, you can use to fill your journal pages. There's no sewing involved. You probably saw maybe in the center of this one bound with a tie. So in the center of each one, you'll see the strings. Let me see if I can find another one here. And that's it. And then it's all glued up. So the pages are perfectly intact, and yet you have all this wonderful flip through that you can do with your journal. So I'm going to hold this up so you can see the spine. So not only is this just a super fun painting project, but hopefully it's something that you will get so much use out of in the future. The surface for the journal is a piece of cut canvas. It's 8.5 inches tall by 15 inches wide. And what I have used, mine is actually floor cloth canvas. It has kind of a backing on it. It's some kind of coating. It's a little bit rubbery, but it's very thin. You can see how flexible the canvas still is. Um, I purchased this at a little shop in Ohio. Um, I got some posters there that were made from floor cloth canvas, which I thought was genius because then the cups don't leak through. Um, hearts and circles and squares, and as a matter of fact, some of you probably received some of the coasters in a gallery prize a couple of years ago. And then I also bought a length of the floor cloth from the same shop. And so that's what I decided to cut up to use for the journal. So you can buy cut canvas though that off of a roll. You can buy it at any fabric shop. You can buy it online from Amazon, among other places. You can get it with the backing or without the backing. Personally, I thought the backing worked out really great for gluing up the pages. The tacky glue really adhered beautifully to the backing of this. My canvas was not pre-primed, so that meant that it had to be sealed. So I used Liquitex clear gesso to seal my canvas, and the background is base coated sand. So what I did was I just squirted out gesso, I squirted out sand, and I used a big scruffy brush. Let's see if I can grab it here. I used a big scruffy brush and just kind of just mashed the gesso and the sand together and down in the grooves of the canvas. Um, And so that was my base coat. That allowed me to get some color on at the same time that I was getting the priming done. Um, and then I did a second coat of sand, again, just picking up gesso in my brush as I worked for the flow. And you'll see when we start painting this, even once primed, the canvas is quite absorbent. So I just keep a little bit of gesso right on my palette. And as I'm picking up my colors, I pick up a little gesso in my brush, or even in these longer sections that needed to be base coated, I just put a couple of drops of gesso down in each section so that I could brush through it. And it really helped the flow of my paint, and it helped it not to be so absorbent. Um, Once the background is dry, give it a light sanding. You'll see what I mean as soon as yours is dry. Depending on the type of gesso that you use, you may feel some grit from the gesso. But what happens is the grain of the canvas, those fibers, kind of stand up and they're a bit stiff when the gesso dries. So if you just give it a light sanding, it softens everything back up and it makes it a lot easier to paint on. I think easier on your brushes, much easier to transfer the design down. So speaking of transferring the design down, I transferred the center half oval, the scallops, the long ribbon, the short ribbon, and then the paper tear line. Okay, so our cover is basically a piece of paper with torn edges, and then there's a dark piece that shows from behind. So you can see here, and let me just open this right up. So you can see the torn paper edge, and that goes all the way across. And so this dark is just a darker layer that peeks from behind. Okay, so those lines are just transferred as normal with transfer paper and your stylus. um, and then the long ribbon is base coated with Bahama blue. The short ribbon is base coated with matcha green. The oval, half oval, is lamp black. And then the little scallops are just cadmium red plus white, a 1-to-1 mix to get us this kind of brightish pink. But we're going to be toning this down when we float it with white, and we're shade with the cadmium red, so the color's going to shift on this a little bit. So this is where I'm at. I wanted to get a lot of the base coating done ahead of time. I do want to show you a bit about the spreading of the paint though, so I left a few scallops to do. I left the background here behind the torn paper. So I'm going to go upside down just to do these last three scallops. And I found that a stiffer bristled brush works really well. These are Black Silver by Dynasty, and this has quite a stiff bristle. It works really well on the canvas. I also have some older titanium brushes by Robert Simmons. These work really great on this canvas. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do these three little scallops and the background behind the paper together, and that way I can show you a bit about the flowing, give you a few tips here, and then we're going to go ahead. We will paint together the jar and the paint brushes, and then we'll work on the embellishments. And let's just see where we go. So as I said, a 1-to-1 mix of white and cadmium red to create that pink. And so I've got some here ready to mix. And then I just keep a little drop of gesso right on my palette, and I'm going to pick a little of that up into my brush. So what I found helpful on these scallops was to kind of do the edges first. And as always, I'm in a pretty tight spot, so let me slide this. Okay, so I'm going to come along this inside edge, and I'm going to be turning my brush so that I'm using the chisel of the brush. And so you can see how I can really scrub that paint down in the grooves and then turn the curves. Okay. So I'm going to come right down all three of these. And then I'll do the outer curves. And I managed to mix this one up a little bit lighter than the color I had previously. So I'm going to just darken it up a tiny bit. My cadmium red is quite loose and my white is thick, so I'm just eyeballing my 1-to-1 puddle here. I'm going to just go ahead and refresh my others and just get everybody to kind of blend in here. You're not going to see a lot of the base coat coming through because we're going to put a pattern on the scallops and then we've got our shading and highlighting to do. So I'm not going to worry too much about the color here, but I'll just give a little quick refresher, mostly in the centers, because as I said, we're going to be highlighting and shading anyway, just so everybody's kind of looking the same here. If I zoom in, you can see right here my color is not down into the canvas, and so that's why I really love these stiffer bristled brushes, because I can just slide right on the chisel and then the bristles kind of flick down into those grooves, and that'll give me a nicer edge. So I'm just kind of checking those edges. Okay, so there's our scallops. Pretty, pretty. I love these colors. The theme for January was bright beginnings. And so when I started this project, I actually had something a little more rustic in mind. You know, I love my rustic. And I ended up painting over that and going with this design. And I'm so glad I did. I like it so much better. Okay, so we have sand down. We are going to put a little yellow ochre and clear gesso out on our palette. We're going to tint the edges of our paper with yellow ochre. So I'm going to put yellow ochre out. I'm going to put some clear gesso out. And I'm just going to load my brush in the gesso, and then I'm going to pick the yellow ochre up on the corner of this angular brush and just come along this edge, and then I'm going to just walk the color down, down, down until I run out of color. Okay, so our clear gesso is going to be the medium to help us move this paint. And I'm just going to walk that right down. And I want you to see how I'm coming into the gesso every time. Again, I want my edge to make sure that I've got good coverage there in the edge. Just going to slide across above the scallops. This is just, again, the gesso, just to blend that out. Only this little spot right here that's a little tricky, but we're just going to slide on our chisel and that's going to be fine. Okay, so you can see how we're just blending that right away. I'm going to add a little more, try to keep my palette in view for you too. So you can see I'm just really using my gesso this the same way I would use water if I were fluting. I don't want to use water on my canvas because I want to just be able to keep going wet and wet here. And so with just the gesso, just walking that down until it just disappears right into that sand background. So pretty. So pretty already. So I'm just going to take this all the way across. I know I'm out of your view, but I'm going all the way to the other edge. I'm going to pull this up a bit so you can see. Make sure I don't have any little canvas dimples that are showing through here. And then I'm going to come down my edge again with my gesso. Okay, so you can see how nice that's coming. And I'm going to flip and do the bottom edge. I tried to really keep this kind of basic of the painting because there's so much to do for this project, but you can always do more of anything. So if you wanted to use this yellow ochre and shade underneath and around the ribbons, you certainly could do that. I did not, but you would be more than welcome to do that if you feel like you want to do that. Okay, so there's our tinting. Very pretty. So now we're going to take marigold, and I still have some gesso out, so I'm going to keep using that pile, and I'm going to bring my marigold just to the other side. Bring this in so you can see. So here's my gesso. I'm bringing marigold to the opposite side, and we just want to base coat in the remaining area along the top. And this is a little smaller area, so I'm going to be using a number 8 titanium brush for this. But the same way, I'm going to bring gesso and marigold into my brush, and this is just straight up base coating. So I've got a lot of gesso in here because that's what gives us the flow. And we're going to do our shading right away. So if it's not dry, it's totally fine because we'll be doing wet and wet blending. And if it is dry, that's fine too. Okay, so just work all the way across. This torn edge is uneven, so I am kind of like pushing, I'm trying to push little divots in there, and I will really define that with the honey brown when we shade. The gesso works kind of like matte medium does. It gives the paint a little transparency. So once I have the first layer on, you can see I'm coming back in with more paint and going over it a second time. So this is really just like I did that sand at the beginning, coming in with lots of gesso, basically tinting the gesso to get a first layer down. And then remember how I said if you just use the chisel of your brush, you can really scrub that in. So you can see how that works. I'm literally just scrubbing and sliding the chisel along that edge. You don't have to be too careful here because, as I said, we're going to shade that with honey brown. So, and it's a rustic torn edge, so we don't have to be too careful with it. Okay, so let's keep right on going here. I'm going to switch back to the angular brush I was using, and it's pretty scruffy. It's a pretty old brush, but again, it has that nice stiff bristle. So we are going to, let's put a little white highlight first along the very top edge, and then we'll put our honey brown so that our shadow covers any extra highlight. And this is going to be very little work. We're going to do this quickly, and what we get, we get. We're not trying to get a perfect float across this edge. We're just going to blend some white. Look how quickly. This is all we're going to do. Because our marigold is still wet, it just blends right in. And again, I'm using the chisel of my brush um, more than anything. And just come right along that upper edge and tint that with a bit of white. I'm going to rinse here and then blend that in. See how quick that was? That's all we want to do is get a little pale color going across there and nothing like that on the bottom. And then we're going to move to honey brown. And now we're going to put our shadow in. Again, we're wet and wet here. And really use your brush to kind of push along this edge so you get a nice uneven edge. I think I'm going to switch to my smaller brush here so I have a little more control over that shadow. Okay, so as I scrub, I'm just pushing some pressure on my bristles so I get kind of a raggedy looking edge there. If my camera will focus on here. I'm painting at night, which is a little hard sometimes. Let me add a little light here and see if that helps. There we go. Okay, so see how I've pushed that? That's what we want, a nice kind of raggedy look. And I'm still using gesso in my brush. So I'm pulling the edge on the chisel and then just pull that color up and let it blend right in with the other wet paint. And then once you have the shadow on the edge created, then you can start bringing the color up a little higher. I'm going to show you my finished journal. My shadow is maybe 1/4 of an inch along this edge. Okay, but that's done in 2 steps. So I'm first creating all my little jaggedy um, jaggedy edges, and then now that one filled out really nicely there. Okay, so just keep working along here. And if you need to freshen up the marigold, you could also double load your brush and get a little better blend. you can pinch off your brush. So I've gotten pretty wide right here and I don't want to get too wide. So I'm just pinching my brush off and that way I can come right back over and blend that out. Okay, go back into my gesso. Slide, slide, slide. That was nice. See, now it's really nice and wide down here. So I'm going to pinch my brush out and just soften that right up. And let's turn my journal. My 15 inches is more than I have for space here. Okay, so again, I'm going to pinch out. I've got a nice width here and I don't want it to get any wider. So just pinching my brush out and then blend that line right away. Okay, this is looking good, looking good. Okay, so now we're going to go down to the bottom. And we've got our 3 torn edges down here in the bottom. Again, just working, always working in my gesso. And push that torn edge, slide and push, blend it out. Ooh, that's a really, really good spot. See, just as you pull, just kind of nudge your brush and you'll get that little uneven edge that is exactly what we're after. Okay, one more corner here. Sliding my color, push, push. Now see how thick this one is? So I'm just going to get my paper towel and again pinch out my brush and blend that line right away. Okay, there we go. Now we just want to put a highlight on the top edge of the paper. So this is a piece of torn paper. This is what's showing from behind. So now we want to add a white highlight all the way along top edge. And this one, I am going to do my best to just do a more normal float. I want this to be a soft tint. I'm going to still use the gesso. But I'm going to side load my brush. And let's see how it goes down. I have found that a little gesso on the surface helps. And I'm going to put a little water in my brush this time. Just a little. So I can get some nice soft color here. Okay. We have all these great little edges that we just created. So now we want to go up against those. So I don't want to go too fast because I want to be able to work with what we just created with our shading. So I just want to nudge the corner of my brush up against the shadows. And then this is why I've gone to a wider flat brush so I can soften all of that out. So I'm just rinsing often. Try to keep my palette in here for your reloading in the gesso, but I do have a little more water left in my brush. and then come into the white. So I'm leaving my heel up off and my loaded toe. I'm really pushing that right up against that edge and then come back with the whole brush and soften the line right down into that beautiful yellow ochre that we already put on. Okay, so in this section, I still had a good deal of moisture left in my brush, so I'm just kind of pre-spreading it along my canvas and then rinsing back into gesso, slide my edge, soften it out. Okay, so we're just working it right around. Almost there. The inside journal pages, I chose to copy dye my pages. Wait, the page is over here, I didn't see it. I chose to copy dye my pages because I was using so many old papers. So I did not copy dye the vintage papers, but I did copy dye the regular paper. It was legal size. Sorry, I called it ledger. At one point, I was making that in percentages, and that's not ledger, so how do I say ledger? So it's legal size paper, which is 8.5 by 14. And that's the page size of the base whole journal. I know they were 4.5. So copy dye, I used instant copy. I have all this included in the packet. So if you want to go that route, you've got information. I did include some pictures of that process, but I used a cookie sheet and put about a package of water in the cookie sheet. Because I'll maybe a tablespoon of coffee. You really can do anything from lightly tinting to really getting ready. So I did maybe a couple tablespoons of coffee, tablespoon or two, and just dip it in. And then I had my oven on. I used the oven to help dry the paper, and so I baked it. And one really thing that happened, I laid some of the pages right on the oven grate, and so I got coffee cool where the paper was resting against the grate, and I got awesome lines. That was not planned. Didn't know that was gonna happen. Now that I know it will not me. I do it again on purpose sometime, but oh, I loved it so much. So I did various shades. I started out with a little dark paper, and then as I went along, I just got a little more water out refreshing coffee, and that way my pages got a little lighter. So I have some really grungy and some that are not so grungy. You can see I have moisture in my brush. I'm pulling moisture first, and then coming back into my paint so I can really get that edge. And so see, right here the canvas texture does not go in when that happens. I just coming back into paint in the gesso and just push that right down. And so this brush I'm using is not as stiff. So for now, I'm just getting the nice softness in. And if I try twice and end up feeling I'm just going to leave it alone, then I'll come back with one of the titanium brushes and just go ahead and take care of that. This big brush is a really great job on these long white edges. So once I have the paper tinted, then the covers to each story. So a story is a group of papers in your book, and usually you have several stories, several bundles of paper. And then each story gets a cover, and the covers are all glued together. So I wanted my covers to have blue because I love, most of you know this, is blue. I love it so much. So I turned that into my book pages, and so I did. I tinted, I had very mild coffee solution left in a tray, and I put some bottle blue paint right in the coffee water. And oh my goodness, I got some fantastic effects. I was so happy. And then when I was stirring one of the tinted papers, but what actually when I was cleaning it up, it dripped on coffee paper, and so I got blue drips on some of the coffee pages, a couple of them too, I think. I just let it alone, and the paint pushed the coffee that cooled on the surface, and so the blue drips of coffee stains around it. I mean, I could not have created something more wonderful intentionally, and so happy with the papers. But again, you don't have to go through all that. If you do not want to have tinted paper, just use regular paper. But do finish your journal. The whole process is so fun. Now, after saying that, if you don't want a journal, you certainly can paint this on a tote bag. Put it in your journal for art tote. You can paint it on canvas and hang it in your workspace. Do what you will with the design, but the journal's fun. Okay, but there we have the paper background is done. The top sheet of torn paper all set. So let us, I think we're going to go ahead and do the scallops. Normally, what do we do when we paint? We start with the innermost part of the design and work our way out. I'm like a broken record. I tell you that all the time. We're breaking the rule this time because these elements that we have on here right now are kind of quick and easy things. So let's get those right out of the way. And then we will work on the jar and the paintbrushes. So the little scallops have a very fine little pattern. I'm not sure if you can see, but just for interest. So it's kind of like maybe patterned fabric. You might think of it that way. So what we're going to do is put a little cadmium red down on our palette. And I'm going into that spot that I had mixed previously. And if there's anything damp there, it's gonna pick it up. And if not, that's fine too. I'm just staying in that same puddle. And these are just little scribbles, okay? So let me zoom in here. You can make them curved. You can make it replicate handwriting, which is kind of sort of what I had in mind, but I didn't try to make I didn't try to write anything, and I didn't try to truly make letters. Oh, I need to go darker. I just made kind of components of letters, so curves and mostly just curves and kind of just letter shape. So, okay, that might be, I guess I'm gonna have to zoom in more here. As long as we can stay focused here, we're good. Okay, so I'm not even really trying to make letters this time. I'm just putting some lines through each one. So that's that. I'm going to use my dryer and dry this because while we did want to have things blending before, this time we don't want to blend away these lines. So I'm going to dry this and then we'll put our highlight around the curves and we'll put cadmium red at the base. Okay, so again, I'm going to have a little gesso out, a little white, and I'm going to work with the gesso in my brush for a little flow. And we're going to float those curves. So I'm going to pick up gesso. I'm going to pick up white on just one corner. I'm going to put a little droplet of water and just let myself pick up a tiny bit of liquid. And let's start up a little higher and work our way down. So we're just doing the outermost portion of the curve and let it fade away. I'm not coming all the way into the base. Okay, and I'm going to pull out some of that extra fluid because I don't want to get any of that washy color in here, although I already did get a little, and I'll just fix that up with a little black before we do the center. So we're just going to go around the outer curve of each of these little swirls. Yeah, I'm getting some white in there for each one, but that's okay. That's the great thing about having the black in the center. Originally, I was going to use soft black instead of lamp black. I'm just going to see if I can pick some of that off. I was going to use lamp black instead of soft black, but that happened to me when I was floating around when I was just working on the brushes too. So I switched to lamp black, and that way I could cover a multitude of sins. Okay, so more gesso, just a little paint on the corner. And I need a little more liquid. Pick up a little bit of water. And the same thing I had mentioned earlier, if you want to add, more than what I've done, you might want to have some floating behind the scallops. That's totally fine. Like I said, there's a lot of elements to this project. I knew it was going to get lengthy, and so I tried to keep things a little simple. Just making sure all my little grooves in the canvas have paint in them as things start to dry. I don't want any of those little pockets peeking through. Okay, one more of these. Okay, there's our outer curves. So let's give this a try. Bahama blue ribbon, I really didn't do anything to whatsoever. I just left it blue. It has some black dots on it. It has some little dip dots from the flowers. That's it. The ribbon, that's the match of green. We're going to float light avocado along the bottom edge and white along the top, and actually we're going to go the reverse of what I just said and put the white on first, and then the light avocado because we have white out already. So we're going to do this just like we did the upper edge of the paper. I'm just loading up in gesso. Just a little liquid in the brush. And sometimes putting that liquid down ahead of you really helps. So you can lay down a little bit of loose gesso head. Now I'm gonna make the curve here part way with the white. Just blend that right away. I need to switch to a small brush again so I can get into that fine point. Or an angled brush, but my stiff bristled angle brush is not it's not to a nice sharp point. So I'm going to use my flat brush and I'm just going to pull on the chisel and then blend that out. And again, I'm not going to worry about anything that has gone over into the black because we're just going to go ahead and fix that with black. And I have some canvas here that's created. I've got the little canvas holes, so I'm just going over this section one more time. Make sure everything's filled in. Okay, that's the top of the ribbon. And the bottom is super easy. So I have a little moisture in my brush. I'm literally just going to lay down some damp gesso here. Got a little something. There we go. And then I'll pick up the light avocado on the toe of my brush and just blend that right along like we did the dark edge at the very top. I'm going to just be on the lower part of this curve. And you know what? That's, I don't want that to be too stark. So let's get our matcha out and let's do a dirty brush blend and help this matcha along. A little too dark for my liking. So I'm going to go into my gesso. I'm going to pick the matcha up, pick the light avocado, and do a brush blend of the two to force that together. And right along that bottom edge. Ooh, that's pretty. Use the chisel of your brush in the point. Just pull it out and soften. So this is all just that, again, wet and wet blending. So we don't have to struggle with our float because we're just blending it away with the pressure of the brush and that beautiful texture of the canvas. Pretty, pretty, pretty. Okay, awesome. Now let's come back to our scallops and we're going to use the cadmium red and we're just going to float the base of the scallops with the cad red. Again, just kind of going down to a bit smaller brush so I have a little more control. I've got gesso out on my palette again. And let's see if I can get back under the camera. Okay, so it's just gesso. I'm going to come down maybe 3 scallops. Okay, and then picking up the cadmium red on the toe and just blending this against the black. That's our first concern. close that gap between the black. I'm going to just dab off my brush and then put good pressure on my brush and blend this out. And pull that color right up because it's so transparent. And those little brush strokes that we made still show through. Okay, so there's 3 done. So I'm going to come to the next couple and lay down gesso again. Okay, this is because the paint's dry. So if we had wet paint, we would be blending wet and wet into the paint, but the paint's dry, so we're going to let the gesso. And you could also use canvas blending gel for this. It would work the same. You could probably use matte medium for this. I just didn't want to have you have too many products, and so look at all we can do with our gesso. Clear gesso and matte medium are basically the same thing. It's just that most clear gessos have some tooth in them. There's an aggregate in it to give your surface some texture. That's why we usually put gesso on surfaces. And matte medium does not have that aggregate added to it. So when I first started doing mixed media, I used clear gesso instead of matte medium, and I would get so frustrated over the rough texture, and I kept trying different clear gessos, and then I did a little research on it, and I was like, oh, it's meant to be that way. It was like one of those aha moments. But I did find that Prima Cinnabar, I'm not sure if I say these names correctly sometimes, but Prima Clear Gesso does not have the aggregate in it, and it is great clear gesso. This Liquitex gesso does have some toothiness to it, but it's not bad. It's not bad. And because we're working, so if I was working on paper, I wouldn't like it, that texture that leaves behind. But because we're working on canvas, the canvas kind of soaks that, absorbs it. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to grab my black and just do a quick little cleanup on this edge. And then I'm going to turn the camera off for a moment, and we're going to transfer the pattern for the jar of brushes and the brushes. Before we start painting the paintbrushes, while we're mixing our base coat colors, I will tell you that the bristles are honey brown plus a touch of white. The ferrules are gray sky, and then the brushes are a variety of colors. You really can use any colors you want here. I added a little drop of white to most of my colors. And that way, when we shade against the ferrules and against the jar, we get that little pop of color, and the base coat becomes a built-in highlight in the little bit of brush handle that's sticking out of the jar. So this is cad, cadmium red plus a touch of white. This is desert turquoise plus a touch of white. This is marigold with a touch of white, and then again, desert turquoise with a touch of white, and ferrules are gray sky. Okay. Um, because of the texture of the canvas, we're not going to get these perfectly detailed bristles on our brushes, for that matter, the brushes themselves. So these will be perfectly imperfect. So as you begin, yourself be okay with that. If I zoom in here, okay, you can see they are not what they would be if we were painting them on a smooth surface because there's so much texture to deal with. We are just going to make the impression of paintbrushes. Okay? They're paintbrushes in a jar. We can tell they are. We're not gonna stress over little details that we can't help. So, all that said, I'm going to use a little round brush and honey brown plus a touch of white. So my palette's getting kind of a mess here. I've got some white gesso. I'm just going to add a little bit for a little flow and maybe just a little drop of water just to thin the paint down a little. I'm going to pick up a dollop of white and we're just going to base coat. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. We're just going to base coat as best we can on this surface. We're dealing with small areas, so it's hard to get our details exactly how we might like them, but we're going to do the best we can. Okay, so let's do the brush handles next because the ferrule holds the bristles and the handle together. So we will put those on top. So my first one is cadmium red with a touch of white. Again, really outlining the edges to try to avoid the little divots. And then I have two brushes that are desert turquoise. Okay, so this one has pretty long ferrule. So for all of these, we don't have a lot of brush peeking out. That's another reason I decided to go bright. That way what we do see is eye-catching and something exciting. Even though they're small, they lend a nice pop of color against that black background. And let's do the other one while we're right here. This one has just really a tiny bit poking out. Maybe I'll go a little more. And the last one is going to be a yellowy handle. And so we're going with marigold. And on this one, the touch of white helps us to have a little more opacity because the marigold alone against the black is kind of difficult to work with. But when we add a little bit of white, it helps. The same with the cadmium red, actually. It really helps give us a little better coverage. Okay, aren't they pretty? Now we will put the base coat for the ferrules. That's a simple one, gray sky. Okay, the flat brush barrel kind of comes in and back out for a little interest. And I'm just, even though I have a little round brush, I'm still kind of scrubbing that paint right down in the texture. So I've got a couple little cleanups here. So this one, I want to get kind of a little indent there and then back out. So I'm just going to follow that curve into there. See how we can just get along that edge, get our lovely shapes. Okay, so for our bristles, what we're going to do is we're going to pull some strokes through that are lighter, and then we're going to pull some strokes through that are darker just to give the idea that we have some brush hairs. Okay, so we're going to start with yellow ochre. I think I want to get our honey brown color back in here first. So let's blend a little honey brown at the base of the bristle. A little harder on these little small brushes, but if you just pull the color up on the toe, we can get there. And I think from the top down, and then our original color gives, it kind of becomes a glow and we get almost a belly in our brush. And this darker color will be something a little better for the yellow ochre to sit against. See how nice that is? Plus, it does kind of match our actual brushes a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to take my liner brush. I'm going to go into yellow ochre. I don't want too much moisture because it will run in again in the canvas texture. So we have to have a little liquid in the brush in order to let the paint flow out of a liner brush, but just a little. Okay, so we're just going to pull and just stay right up on the tip of your brush as best you can. And just start pulling a few little hairs, just giving the indication of hairs. Okay, and then in the same brush, without even rinsing, I'm going to pick up white, a tiny little moisture in the brush, add a few more strokes with the lighter color. And then I still have my honey brown out. I'm going to grab the soft black and I'm going to do a brush blend and pull up from the base in kind of in between the strokes that we just did. And these are not necessarily darker hairs, but they are shadows within the hairs. So it gives us a fullness. And I'm going to turn my canvas a little bit here so I have a better angle for pulling. And I'm going to keep this. Hopefully my hand won't be in your way, but I'm going to pull these little hairs up from the bottom of the ferrule first. And you be the judge of how dark they are. You want them to show up against. Um, we had we floated that honey brown in, so we may need actually more of the soft black. See how full that little round brush looks just from doing that? And then at the tip of this brush, I have a lot of light strokes that are kind of sitting on top of one another. And so I'm going to separate those with a few strokes down from the top. So same thing here. I don't want to cover the light strokes. I'm going to kind of pull between them. And I'm using much more soft black than honey brown because we had floated the honey brown. So the soft black is working a little better at breaking that color up. Okay. And then the angle brush, stay right up on the tip of your brush as best you can. Okay, and that's all we're after. Just that impression of bristles. And then again, maybe wait until we're finished to make sure you don't have any other little trouble spots. But if you had any little areas that got caught up on the texture of the canvas, you can come back with your lamp black and fix them up. I have one little bobble right here, but I'll wait. Okay, so now our brush handles are very simple. We're going to take the base coat color without any white in it, and we'll blend that on the handle. But before we do that, we're going to get a little dry brush, a little white, and we're going to pull a little white highlight down the center of the ferrule and the brush handle. And again, this is going to really show the texture of the canvas. So we're not going to fight it because we're on canvas. So it's it's going to show those little squares. But we want a little highlight there. And so it's a fair trade. Okay, so down the center of the ferrule, my brush handle. This is going to give us some nice shape here in just a moment. Okay, now a little float with that original color. So on the left-hand brush, it's cadmium red. I'm just going to touch against the ferrule and against the glass jar. Just narrow, just to get me the color back and a little bit of a shadow. The next two brushes will be the desert turquoise. So I just need a tiny speck out on the palette, just a tiny bit on the brush. And then the marigold. And then as long as I'm dry, I'm going to come down the left side of my handle also. Now on the ferrules, we're going to come down the left side with black. And this is going to be blended out in some gesso so that we get some transparent color here. So even though it's so narrow, I'm really blending my color so that it just puts a nice little tint on that left side of the ferrule. And again, I'm catching the canvas texture because it's almost like a dry brush, but that's fine. Then a fun little trick here. We're going to load the brush with the lamp black, and then on the chisel, I'm just going to drag the chisel edge across the top and across the bottom, and see how that creates so much interest there. It gives us some little grooves, and I'm going to do this on each ferrule, but I want it to be different on each one. So on my angle brush, I'm just going to come across the full part at the top, and then I'm going to leave a little more space, so not as tight together as I did the round brush. And then on this, oh, that was my flat brush. And then on the ankle brush, maybe I'll do two since I just did one there, and switch it and do just one here. And on my liner brush, isn't that great? I love that. It adds so much interest. Okay, while we are here and before we do the jar, since these little curly cues do not overlap the jar, let's go ahead and put our little swirls on. So this is matcha green, a little, we have to have some, a little water for flow, not too much. We don't want to have runny puddles going on in the canvas. So just normally we judge our liner brush by the little drip drips, but this time we're not going to do that. So this vine crosses over the ferrule of this little liner brush and swirls next to the jar. And guess what? You're going to see, again, the canvas the first time around. That's okay. Once you have your swirl on, you can then come in a little bit of the clear gesso, stroke over, but stay again up on the tip of your brush. You don't want these to be too thick, and we do not want them to be runny. Okay, then we have a swirl. It comes from this direction. And then we've got a couple little, almost like little ferns. They're very fine at the tip, a little thicker as they go, but not too thick. And then you can just dip your brush, I'm using my liner brush still, back into the paint and let the tip of your bristle, create a little leaf by setting the tip down and just set your brush down and stand it back up again. Tip, set, lift, set, lift. You can also use a round brush for this. It's nothing to sweat about, nothing to get bothered about, just a few little press leaves. And then I also added a few of these little leaves around my swirl. And if you set from the other direction, starting at the tip, and set your brush down, you get a rounded tip. And then I like to let them get smaller, either smaller towards the tip or smaller towards the base sometimes. And let's do a few on this other one. You don't have to go all the way around because a fern gets that little curl. Oh, it's out of your view. Sorry about that. Okay, that's the hard part over. Now we're going to just do a quick base coat of the jar with white. And then we're going to tint it with Sea Breeze. So I'm going to go back to one of my stiffer bristle brushes here. I'm going to use my titanium. I'm going to pick up a little bit of gesso, my white, and we're going to tint the jar and around our little curves where the threads are. You can really put some good pressure on your brush to fill that in. This is the spot that we want to be a little more careful inside the V from the ribbon. So you might want to switch to a smaller brush when you hit that spot. Depends on what size brush you're using and what the chisel is like. Okay, now we're just going to put a nice sheer tint of Sea Breeze over the whole jar. We want this to have the look of, an antique glass canning jar. See how nice that sits on top of the white? And then we're going to do a little trick here in a second. We're putting the Sea Breeze on, a little gesso in the brush to give us that flow. And then we're going to take our paper towel and we're going to lift off some of the color from the middle so the white shows back through. And that's going to help us with a bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to tap and remove a little. Now I've got a little bit of kind of a mottled look to my jar, not solid color. It's just what I want.
Actually record a new video, I could just go in and take the clips from
Gotcha.
mine. Like with the print to make a video. And then just share it.
Okay, now I've loaded, corner loaded in white, and you can see I'm just dragging a little bit of white across the threads of the jar just to define the threads, nothing more. I'm going to dibble a little bit of white in the full areas of the jar just to brighten that up a bit. We're going to lose that in just a moment when we start to put the we're going to start to put bluegrass green on now. This is our final beautiful color. So again, with our gesso, so we have the means of kind of floating this color. My brush is loaded in gesso and then corner loaded in bluegrass green. I'm pushing this right tight against the edge of the jar, down the edge. Don't want to get into my ribbon. And then my paper towel is sitting here, so I'm brushing off on my paper towel. And then I'm going to pull this color in and just blend that right in, just like we did the yellow ochre in the beginning, just like we did the honey brown shading. So we get a nice, soft, transparent shadow that comes right across our jar. Okay, so again, do the same thing. Load in the gesso, a little bit of bluegrass on one corner of the brush. I'm going to turn you over so that I can come up the side edge of the jar. Get into the outer edges here where the threads are. Wipe off my brush just to get rid of some of that excess paint and pull that color in. And I want to have it pretty wide, especially down here on this side. Also in the neck area. And I'm sliding on my chisel in between that white highlight that we did, just to define again the threads. This is just some gesso in the brush that I already have had loaded, just to soften everything up here. And I'm going to pinch out, and I'm going to just slide my white across one more time. Let's talk about the stamping that's here on this left edge. So I found a phrase, and I want to make sure I'm getting the name right. I think this was Albert Hubbard, and I was drawn to this because I have several of his books that are almost handmade books, and they're full of all kinds of quotes, not just inspirational quotes, although some of them are, but they're filled with philosophical quotes. They're filled with historical thoughts. The man was a thinker, and it's very fascinating to read through his books because his mind just went from one topic to the next, and then they were bound and they're on rag paper, and they're kind of amazing. But I stumbled on this quote: "A gentle reminder that creativity isn't only what we make; it's how we live." And there was actually just a little bit more to it, but I was limited by space, and so I had to condense it just a little. What I used here was archival ink and a little small stamp set that I have. I believe it's Making Memories, and they're 1/8 inch letters. Um, so I did this down my left-hand side because I wanted to have a nod to the mixed media that was inside. You can choose any phrase that you like. You could hand write it on with your pigment pen. You could get the quote and cut paper strips and use matte medium to put them down on your cover, collage them on. Your cover is canvas, so this is a canvas. It will hold up. As a matter of fact, if you look at the back of mine right here, you'll see actual, this is paper. You see the edge right here? This is actual paper. It's music paper, which I'm going to sand some of this down to expose it. But this was an experiment, and you can, I mean, it wrinkles when I bend, but it's not peeling off, and I like the wrinkles. So you could do collage on there, but stamp it if you want to, and it can be anything. If your stamps are a little bigger, then maybe you do inspire coming down this way, or you know, depending on the size of your stamp, maybe creativity, or maybe you do art down here and journal on here. Make this project your own. That's what I want for you. These are ideas for you to run with, okay? All right, so this is our cover to this point. This area is for the stamping. Um, you can see that I've stenciled some polka dots, which of course I love. And then 3 little black polka dots underneath here. What we're going to focus on right now are the embellishments. So we need another little piece of the bare canvas. We're going to transfer 5 flags, 2 large flowers, 1 small flower, 3 large leaves, and 3 small leaves. Um, You can paint sections of the canvas ahead and then transfer if you want to. That's what makes the most sense to me. So we have cadmium red plus white, 1 to 1, right? The same as our scallops. We have 2 banners, and 1 flower. We have Bahama blue plus white flower and 1 banner. We have a marigold flower. We have matcha plus white on all of our leaves, and we have matcha here. So, okay, coat of gesso on. We need a small flower and the rest leaves. So let's go ahead and do the cadmium first. We have 1 that's actually cadmium red with only a tiny bit of white in it. And I'm going to do an area that is bigger than the banner so that I know I'm not, I have enough space. Okay, add a little bit of gesso to this so that I can fill in those little holes. And then I'm going to bring my white in. For these 2. And then we have a Bahama blue plus white. And let's see, I might as well fill in my blue flower. These pieces are just whimsical flowers they paint up in a jiffy. I'm holding off on the matcha for a second because that's a pretty strong color. I have the other pink flower that I kind of forgot, so I'm going to get these squares and then the yellow. And then once the yellow's on, I'll do the match. Okay. Now, match it for our flag, glass pennant to the flag. And our leaves are going to be matcha plus white plus clear gesso. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do now this whole lower section of the canvas for all of my leaves. I'm going to put some clear gesso down first just so I get my paint flow here. And I probably don't need all of this, but I'm going to put down an amount that I don't have to go back and say, oh, I need a little bit more. Another beautiful color. It's almost like celery shoot. I love that color too. A little 4x7 piece is all we needed for all the remaining pieces. Okay, so I'm still a little tiny bit tacky. I'm going to turn the camera off and let this dry a little bit longer. I'm going to transfer the actual cutting lines on, and then we have just a few bits of highlights and shadows, and then we'll be able to cut them out and get these adhered on to the cover with tacky glue. Um, we'll go over the details that are remaining. We're almost finished right now, and the actual journal assembly will be in a second video. So we're going to let this colorful little piece of canvas dry, and then we're going to turn this into flowers and banner and leaves and all the pretties that make up the cover, and then we will get the outer um, portion of the journal finished. So I have put my designs on, and I just wanted to have full transparency here. I had a little trouble transferring the pattern on. And so I penciled mine on. But if you have trouble and you don't want to pencil it on, you could transfer on to a piece of cardstock or um, I don't know if you have file folder scraps. File folders, manila folders are fabulous for making pattern templates. So I have pieces of them sitting around. So you could transfer onto something like that, your individual pieces, one Punnett square, one large flower, one small flower, one large leaf, one small leaf, and then just trace around it onto your canvas pieces, and that would be totally fine. So there are my other pieces. We're going to start with the pennants though. Remember on the remember on the scallop, we did the lines going through so it looked like handwriting or some sort of pattern. We're going to do the same thing on the pink, the lighter pink pennants, because we want to make it look like that came from the same pattern, the same fabric. Okay. So I'm going to again just grab my liner brush. Once I see what I did with it here, I'm going to pick up cadmium red. That's what we made our lines with, our little squiggles, our mark making. I'm going to blot to make sure I don't have too much liquid. And so we just have two of them, okay? So I'm going to just, I like to make mine look like portions of a letters that you maybe just can't see. So anyway, you do any sort of pattern that you like. Okay, so we're going to set these to a side. These are going to be the first, and these are going to be the ends of the pennant. On the Bahama, all we're going to do is add some white dots. These all get a little bit of shading too, but we're going to do these details first. So we need white. We're just going to go across our planet and dot these. And they sort of stagger. So I'm making 3 dots across, 2 dots that go in between the spaces from the first one, and 1 dot that goes in between the spaces. Okay, so that's going to be number 2. And I'm going to skip number 3 for just 1 second and go to number 4. On this one, we're going to just put some white stripes. So we have our white out already. I'm going to thin the paint down only very slightly. We're just going to pull white stripes across this piece. Okay, easy peasy. And now this last one, we're going to give the idea that there are flowers on here without having any kind of a big deal with the flowers. So we have a darker red piece. That means we're going to be needing something light to stand out on it. So on my palette, I have both cadmium red and white. So I'm going to mix these together, just brush mix. I'm going to just mix a tiny bit of clear gesso in. And then we're going to just give the idea of flowers. So I'm just going to wiggle my brush. If I can get in closer here, I'm going to wiggle my brush into a sort of flower shape. It's not going to be exact. It doesn't need to be exact. And we're going to kind of spread these around on this little tiny pennant as if it's a print again. Okay. And then in the center of each flower, a white dot. And then, we're going to put a few leaves. We're going to use, again, the matcha with a little white mixed in just to brighten it up a little bit so that it shows against the red background. And these are tiny, so I can still use my liner brush since that's just what I happen to mix my colors up in. So we're just going to set down the tip of the brush, set it down, stand it up, set it down, stand it up. Okay, we need to let these dry. So since my leaves are sitting right here, that's what I'm going to do next. We are going to put a white highlight along the top edge and then the darker green along the bottom. And I'm alternating which side gets the highlight because our flowers are going around this curve of the arrangement, which means we're going to need highlights on different sides. And then we're going to add light avocado. And remember when we shaded the matcha green ribbon, we decided that the light avocado was too strong on its own. So we're going to head this off with a brush blend of matcha and light avocado. So I'm completely picking my brush up in matcha and then I'm side loading into light avocado. And we're going to float this on. There are our leaves. And then for our flowers, we're going to highlight a couple of the little petals. The bumps are the petals on these. So I'm just going to put a little bit of gesso down and touch a little white highlight here. Very soft, very soft. We're going to put the desert turquoise around the opposite. Really scrubbing that in with this titanium brush. So I'm outside the lines a little bit, but since I'm cutting it out, that's fine. What I'm really interested in is getting the shading on here. And then I'm also going to shade around the center. Okay, I'm going to apply some gesso. Blend on a little white. And then finally our little marigolds. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on the stamping part, but I did want to show you how I put the phrase on the cover of the journal. And also notice that on my original journal, my phrase is kind of coming around the spine. Again, because this is really artsy and the mixed media flair that's in it, and the way that mixed media tends to layer things and be kind of wonky sometimes. This not only does not bother me at all, I really kind of like it because it gives the idea that there's more to be seen. However, when I set up your line drawing, I did bring the design a little bit closer to the edge here to leave just a little more room on this left side for you. So what you're going to want to do first is fold your cover completely in half, and this is a good time to check and make sure you're still square. The canvas backing, the non-skid backing that's on here really helps the canvas keep its shape. However, it can stretch. So I just folded mine in half and brought my corners together gave it a good press, and I did have a little spot that was a little off up here that I just trimmed. It was actually on this top edge here. So go ahead and fold it in half so you have your center. Okay. And then for the stamps, what I'm using is a Making Memories set. I can't tell you which set this is. Mine happened to come with two different fonts. One is like Courier, like a typewriter font, and the other one is kind of like Arial, where it's just the straight, there's no serifs on here at all. So I've pulled out my letters already so that I can move right along on this. And I was going to pull my book, one of my books from Albert Hubbard, out to show you the quote, and guess what? Apparently this quote is a paraphrase of his quote, and it has been used several times by several different authors. So his was a little more simple. It said, creativity isn't a thing, it's a way. So that has been expanded upon by several people and then requoted and requoted. So after feeling so excited about the quote, because I have some of his books, it wasn't truly his quote. And I don't know who to give credit to, because like I said, I found it attributed to no less than 6 people. So we're just going to enjoy it on here. And of course, you can use another quote if you want to. So for this stamp set, there's a little handle, and this is all magnetic. The letters all have magnets on the backs of them. And there's a line on the handle, the end where you attach the magnets, and that helps keep the letters all aligned. And they do somewhat adhere to one another also. So remember that the stamps are in reverse, so you need to line your lettering. Instead of coming from left to right like we read, it needs to go from right to left. Okay? And it can get a little tricky when you're placing some letters like the B's and D's, P's and Q's. So I suggest having a scrap paper handy, and then just once you ink it up, stamp it one time to check yourself before you put it on your project. So for ink, you're going to want to use something that's archival, a pigment ink, waterproof, because we're going to be going on top of this still. So I'm using Ranger's archival ink, acid-free, permanent waterproof, jet black. So I already have my first line done, and I'm going to turn it, stamp it one time, and check to make sure my lettering is good. And then I'm going to come, and we're going to begin near the top so we have room to come all the way down the side. Okay. And I did purposely place my pennants around my text. So if you, whoops, I just brought that right through my letters that I had all set up. If you want to lay the pennants on first, it wouldn't really, you could do it in any order. Let's just get an idea where these are going to hang. And the most important piece is the one that falls between these two brushes, because we don't want it to overlap our brushes. So mine swoops up. You can let it come down on an angle. Really just have fun with these. But if I put this on here, this gives me a good indication of where I'm going to start. Okay, all of that said, just going to work my way through. You can use the side edge of your stamp is nice and square, and you can square that up with the binding, and that will help you stay straight. You could pencil a light line and use that, and then just erase it later.
but again, I don't mind if mine's a little wonky. So a gentle reminder. Oh, I had these all ready to go. I'm not going to film this whole thing. I just want to show you a few. Just want to get us started. So see how I'm lining these up from right to the left and double checking that my letters are all oriented the correct way. Let's reuse my N from here. So my D. Let's see, so this is not a D. I'm getting tricked here. Okay, D-E-R. I've got to fish out a D. Gentle reminder. C-D. Okay, so I've got everybody on. I'm going to just kind of push them together and try to stay on the line. I'm going to stamp my tester. I don't really need these on anymore, so I'm going to pull these guys off. Okay, a gentle reminder. And just be careful when you're stamping that you don't move them around. I just bumped mine when I stamped. And you may get stamp ink up on the corners of your letters as you work. That I had that happen a few times, especially actually on this word reminder, and that didn't bother me either. But you'll know when you do your tester. So if it comes off on your tester, you can always clean your stamp off. Okay, you can press hard. Actually, I think I should open this up so I have my desktop underneath, because my word reminder did not come out as clear, and I do not dare go over that. So I may have to use my paint and just fill that in a little bit. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. Work your way right down, and I brought mine kind of in and out around the scallop. Okay. Okay, we are going to now do a little fun. We're going to polka dot our background and in this lamp black background. So these polka dots are going to be Bahama blue. These are going to be white. So I actually think I'm going to start with the white because it's okay if my blue gets a little whiter, but I don't want my white to be bluer. So I'm just going to put out some white on my palette. And these are just random. So my stencil has a pattern that's all laid out. That's a repeat pattern. I'm not even going to be using that. I'm just going to add these randomly in the spaces that I have in my design. Okay. And of course, if you are a person who likes more order than this, you can keep things, you do whatever you want. It's your art journal. I'm gonna get this one looking close to the edge, I think. Okay, super fun. Now Bahama blue. And again, this is just random. Okay, now we have a bit of outlining to do. We're going to outline the top edge of the torn paper and the lower edge. So these torn edges are going to be outlined. The scallops are going to be outlined. And then it's up to you if you want to outline the ribbons or not. I did not outline the ribbons, and when I look at my book from the front, I actually like it this way. Oh, I forgot to put these little black polka dots. We're going to want to do that also. Maybe after the flowers on. But when I look at the back, which I didn't carry my outline this far yet because remember I was doing a test, and so my original journal had a different cover. This was actually my cover when I started, and I had a totally different thing going on and then changed my mind, so I flipped and made my back my front. So this isn't carried over completely, but anyway, when I'm looking at the back, I do think I would like the ribbons outlined, so I may outline them. But this is going to be lamp black in your liner brush, and just remember that you want to stay right up on the tip of your brush to avoid getting hung up in those little divots. So I'm thinning my paint down like I always do for line work, just not quite as much. So I'm actually going to add a little more paint because I got a little carried away there.
Okay, we have made it to the end of the journal cover, and what we're going to do now is attach all of our little accessory pieces. We're going to add our leaves. We're going to add our pennant. So the first step to do is just to kind of arrange things how you like them. Keep your highlighting and shading in mind so that you've got your light or bright parts up and your darker parts down. Although once these are adhered, you can continue to paint them. It's not a problem. I actually see a few of my leaves that probably could stand to have a little more shading or highlighting on them. So just kind of arrange things in the way that you like. My leaves on my little yellow flower got really tiny this time for some reason, but they're kind of cute. It's okay. I don't mind it. White sides up. Yes. Okay, and then for the pennant, you can do these how you like, but we did two pink ones. So on mine, the pink were the left and the right sides. And then the cadmium red is my centerpiece, and then the blue and the green just fill in. So you just want to be careful when you place these that you're not covering up any of your words, that you're not covering up a paintbrush that you wouldn't want covered. If you want it to overlap a brush, that's completely fine. The biggest thing I'm watching for um, is that the words that we stamped are not covered. So you're just going to position that whatever makes you happy. Mine kind of comes down and back up to the top. You could make this swirl down and come down on an angle. You could make it just come across a corner or the other side. Play with it and just have fun, whatever makes you happy. We're just going to put tacky glue on our pieces, and you want to make sure to get the glue right to the edge. Oops, if you open my glue. You want to make sure that you get your glue right to the edge of each piece so that the pieces don't lift on you. So when you put your glue down, just use your nozzle to really push it all the way to the edge, especially your little points. And I'm going to position all of these before I really press anything down. And that way, if I need to move something, I have a little playtime. If you use Aleene's tacky glue, or I'm using the Crafter's Pick Ultimate, I love this glue. These all dry clear. So if you have to move a piece and you have to get off a little bit of glue that ended up where you're not wanting it, you're never gonna know. Okay, so let's check spacing. I think these are all good. So I'm just going to go ahead and press it down. And if you have any glue that comes out the side of a piece, you can just wipe it off. You could use a piece of a paper towel to wipe it off. Like I said, it dries clear, but it's going to, if you have a big chunk of glue coming out, it's going to dry as a clear glob. So if you don't want to see it, just wipe it off. Okay, again, just make sure all of your points especially are glued down. And then the flowers and the leaves. So same. And then in the center of the flowers, we're going to glue buttons. I'm not going to show that part in the video, But what I do want to show you is that you can tie some thread through your buttonholes before you glue them on, and that gives you even another little texture element there. It looks so sweet with the thread tied in. And then we're going to add some string to across the top of the bunting so that they're not just banner flags that are just kind of hanging out there. We need something to fasten them to. So we're just going to bring a bead of glue along the top. I think I'm going to swap out my glue. This glue, the crafter's pick, is so great for heavy pieces, but it's super thick and the string doesn't need that much. So I'm going to trade out my glue and use my Aleene's Clear because it's a little thinner and I can very easily run a bead all the way along here. So you're just going to nudge it right up against each of the little buntings. Press it into your glue. Okay, and then the extra little tails of the string I'm going to leave on for now. You can cut them flush with the end of the bunting if you want to, but what I did was to bring it right over the top of my page, and you can't see it here because this inside cover sheet covers it up, but it's sandwiched in there. So it's cute because then the string is going right over the top and disappears onto the inside. Okay, so this is your finished cover. Um, the only thought we're left with is if you want to outline around those ribbons. You can see I'm still undecided on that. Didn't really want them lined. I did not line them here, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. So you decide if you want yours outlined or not. Add your buttons, and then that's all we need to do for the cover. Um, think about how you want to handle your pages, and then you can go back to ToleTown, and there'll be a second video. There's already a second video that shows the assembly, and we talk about the inner pages from there. So I'm just going to give you another quick flip through here. This is one done with various types of papers, but you could do all one kind of paper if you want to. So we talked about that. So go ahead and watch that second video so you can gather up the supplies that you need. Really, it's just paper, tacky glue, and some nice strong string to tie the bindings with, and you'll have a beautiful completed journal of your own. If you decide to paint the design on a tote bag or a canvas or something else, or if you make the journal, post in the Facebook group. It's always so much fun to see your completed designs and how you make them your own. I always love to see that. So please share. Everyone else would like to see also. I'm going to zoom in on here. One last look of it before I turn the video off. Thank you very much for letting me share. I have been so excited about this project, and truly I'm excited to see yours. So I hope you will share. Okay, thanks ladies. Have a great day.